Hi, I'm Lisa Donovan, co-director of brainworks, the Berkshire Regional Arts Integration Network. Today, the brainworks team and I are going to share with you a storytelling strategy that you can integrate into lessons in your classroom. Among the teachers we work with, this storytelling strategy is one of their favorites because it's so adaptable. This strategy is also featured in Shell Education's book series, Integrating the Arts Across the Curriculum. It's called Retelling the Story. In this strategy, students hone their storytelling skills by interacting with an audience and allowing the story to evolve with each retelling. Retelling can be much more creative than simply asking students to restate the original text. Working with the elements of storytelling, students identify the most important aspects of the story and retell those parts, adding their own interpretation, language, voice, gestures, facial expressions, and even props. Students' varied interpretations maximize creativity and imagination. In this video, we'll explore several interactive storytelling techniques that can bring retelling a story to life by deepening the sensory qualities of a story, imagining and personifying the viewpoint of a character, inanimate object, or animal, and exploring the relationship between narrator and characters. Let's take a look at how to implement this strategy in your classroom. And as we go along, watch for evidence of learning in storytelling, language arts, and social studies. Start by selecting an existing story that you want students to work from. This might be a fable, a fairy tale, a folk tale, or even a storybook. Today, we will work with a storybook, My First Day, by Phung Wing Quang and Nguyen Kim Lean. In this book, a young Vietnamese boy travels alone by boat on the Mekong River in order to arrive at his first day of school. This story can initiate conversations about the courage needed to embark on something new for the first time. The story can also encourage dialogue about how young people around the globe travel to school and what school looks like in other regions of the world. Let's imagine this class is learning about Southeast Asia, including important physical features and characteristics of the region. Begin by reading the book to the class. Clarify any questions from students to ensure that everyone understands the story by summarizing what happens in the beginning, middle, and end of the story as a group. Ask students to identify characters in the book, both highlighted characters and also animals, inanimate objects, ideas, forces, and so on, that could help tell the story in the retelling. Next, ask students to generate ideas for sounds and voices that might be heard throughout the story. Students can also be invited to generate possible ideas for movements that are suggested in the story. Students can either write down the ideas on their own and then share with a larger group, or the brainstorming can happen collaboratively. Let's hear the students' ideas.
One of the gestures that I picked up on was specifically the gesture of him paddling to get to school. I like the imagery that conveys.
One of my favorite pictures in the book was when he was in the jungle, and it says fear slithers in like a python, and all the pythons were coming in towards him. And I think that's a really strong gesture of fear slithering in like a python.
I think one of the sounds that I would find really prominent in this is the sound of him paddling through the river. And I feel like that would be a very ongoing thing as he's making his way to school.
The galumphing of water buffaloes and the chattering of a classroom full of animals are examples of onomatopoeia used directly in the story that can translate very easily to this exercise. And other things like the river itself, students can draw on their knowledge of what splashing water sounds like to make noises like that as well.
At the end of the text, he's meeting up with his friends, so getting that gradual addition of people and friendship and just conversation in there is something that I imagine would really bring together that sense of community.
His mom and dad are definitely characters. I almost feel like the jungle is a character because of all the noises that it makes. The buffalo, and his friends at the end.
The motion of the river is very prevalent in both the imagery and sort of the flow of the piece. And there's a part where the waves get really big, and then, but in the parts of the jungle, there's hardly any waves at all, and the water is like glass. And the scene where you see the fish, you're seeing that from the bottom. So that's another way that you can see the water from a different point of view. You got all the sort of gestures in there: the big waves, the small waves, under the waves, over the waves.
The teacher can then model how to retell the story by taking on the role of the storyteller. As the teacher goes through the process, the students' previously brainstormed ideas for characters, sounds, movements, and voices can be integrated into the story by the storyteller's prompts. Let's watch my demonstration. It was the first day of school, and An was excited. He couldn't even get his head around it, but he was also nervous. He was nervous not to go, but because of the journey that he would have to take to go there. The fact is that An lived on the Mekong River in Vietnam, and the Mekong River was so central to his community. It was where they got their food, they fished. It was how they traveled. It was how things came into the community and how they left the community. But he had never been on it by himself. And to go to school today, that's what he had to do. He's excited. He was excited. His mother had told him, "You're ready for this. Be excited. You are so ready." His father said,
Be careful.
He gathered his breath and his strength, and he picked up his backpack. And in his backpack, he had 3 pencils sharpened to a point. He had a notebook that his mother had gifted him. He put the backpack on and walked to the edge of the house where his small open boat was waiting for him. He picked up his river stick. He stepped into the boat, looked around, and was off. He turned around to look at his small house, getting smaller in the distance. As the waves grew bigger, there had recently been flooding in the area, and he kept going. He approached the mangrove forest, where it was dark, and as if invisible eyes were looking at him. And he could feel fear slithering in like a python. But he kept going. And then in the distance, he saw sunlight. He heard his friends. He saw their small boats all going in the same direction. He kept going and saw the shore. And with one final push, he had arrived. He pulled his boat onto the shore, joined his friends, and approached his first day of school. Notice how I employed these elements of storytelling while reading the story. Interaction. As the storyteller, I worked to actively engage the audience, and I adapted based on the energy and the response of the listeners. As a result, every time the story is told, it changes. Words. I used words, spoken, though they could be manually signed, to create connections and invite listeners into the story through sensory details. Actions. The story was activated through vocalization, physical movement, and small and large gestures. I engaged in the storytelling experience so that both I and the audience played a role in this. Imagination. In this storytelling process, I worked to encourage the active imagination of the listener. After the teacher models the storytelling process, ask the class what they noticed. Encourage students to point to the elements of storytelling to support their ideas. Debriefing questions could include what makes a good story? What makes a good storyteller? And in the case of this storybook, My First Day, what are the characteristics of a first time? Now, challenge your students to select a portion of the story to retell. Begin by brainstorming with some writing prompts that will generate ideas. Encourage students to refer to the earlier generated lists where they brainstormed sounds and movements that might occur throughout the story. Additional helpful writing prompts might include: the most important parts to retell in this section of the story are: the parts that could be omitted from this section of the story are: the sounds, smells, sights, tastes, and/or sensations one might experience during this part of the story include: people, animals, or inanimate objects that might become characters in this section of the story include: the point of view that should tell this section of the story is that of. A way to engage the audience during the retelling of this section of the story is by. A way to activate this section of the story through vocalization, physical movement, and/or small and large gestures is to incorporate. Students can then practice retelling the story in small groups and receive feedback from classmates. When students are ready, they can retell their section of the story to the whole class. Remind students of interaction, the element of storytelling that focuses on audience engagement. Students aren't reading their retelling, they're working from memory. Therefore, every time the story's told, it will change a little bit depending on the energy and the response of the audience. Let's see an example of student work.
It was On's first day going out alone. He'd never been before, but he had encouragement and support from his parents.
He swept out onto the river in his open boat, ready for his first day. As he paddled, he came out from the open sky of the town into the closed sky of the jungle.
He could hear the sounds of all the animals out there, feeling as though he was being watched. He could hear the sound of a python coming closer to him, and he was nervous and scared.
The python called out to him, and he was afraid. But his father had told him being careful meant to make what's afraid and make it, or to take what's afraid and make it part of your family. So the trees became more like a family to him, and he kept paddling.
As he broke through the mango tree forest, he could look up and see a blue sky. And he heard birds calling, and he heard the galumphing of buffalo in the distance.
He navigated through the buffalo, and as he passed, he said, "Hello, buffalo!" And in the distance, he saw boys and girls in their own small boats.
He called out to them and said, "Hello, friends."
Hello,
Hello.
And finally, he made his way to the shore and was there ready for his first day of school.
Now let's listen in to the class's final debriefing discussion.
I think when we were actually doing the motions and making sound effects for the story, it brought it more to life for me, and I was able to better visualize it rather than looking at pages in a book. I could see it actually happening.
The illustrations in the book were really rich and really created the world of the book. I think it really helped communicate what he was feeling as well as what the world looked like, especially with stuff like the pythons of fear. going in towards him. And I really think that helped me understand the story.
I think it's really valuable for kids to be introduced to other cultures outside of our own, whichever or wherever our own culture is. And stories are a great way to do that because the idea of a kid going to school for the first time is, pretty much universal.
One thing that I really took from it was it gives a much more immersive experience. Um, I'm dyslexic, so reading has always been something that's hard for me to do. And having oral storytelling makes things so much easier to understand. I'm not going back and rereading things. And it paints a very specific picture in my head about what I'm reading.
Here are a few final ideas to help you use the retelling strategy successfully in your classroom. Remember to use the elements of storytelling intentionally to heighten interest in your retelling. Challenge students to do a retelling from a text of their choice. When students have the power to select a text on their own, they take ownership in the learning process. You don't have to start with an existing storybook. Storytelling works well with content across the curriculum. Try this strategy with nonfiction texts, such as those about an historical event or a scientific process. Think about filming students as they retell their stories. Students can go back and watch the experience and self-evaluate their work. Gather the class in a circle to create a story circle. Each chunk of the story can be retold by a different student. This strategy fosters collaboration because when students complete the telling of their section of the story, they pass the story to someone else across the circle. Try retelling the story with the addition of another strategy called the untold story. Comb through the story to find a character who's not the main focus, or maybe even develop a character who isn't in the story but could be. What is this character's untold story? What new perspective might they bring to the retelling of the story? You'll notice that in arts integration, you don't need to leave the process to assess learning. Assessment is built right into the strategy itself. The planning students engage in as they create their story provides opportunities for teachers to assess learning throughout the strategy. Ask students to stretch their creativity to imagine a moment either before or after the story. Have them tell this moment. You might even have students reinvent the story's ending and tell the alternate conclusion. After students have familiarized themselves with the story, choose one student storyteller to serve as the conductor. Like an orchestra conductor, this person will point to another student to take over retelling the story at any point. The conductor will continue to point to different students to take over the retelling until the whole story's been retold. If there are sounds or movements that are integrated, the conductor can gesture to invite the class to experiment with special effects of sound and movement, making them bigger, smaller, louder, and/or softer. Debriefing conversations during and at the end of the process allow students a chance to explain their thinking. These discussions can solidify academic concepts for them and help you to evaluate their comprehension of the topics. When artistic work is shared, students can also provide peer feedback. If you liked this video, be sure to check out other tutorials from BrainWorks on how to use arts-based strategies in your classroom, including Tableau, movement phrases, soundscape, chants, found poetry, and collagraph printmaking. Visit us on the web at brainworks.mcla.edu. You can also check out the Arts Integration series, Integrating the Arts Across the Curriculum through Shell Education. Thanks for watching.